Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show, recording our intro. Man, are we lucky to get this person. You will not find him on any other channel in any other place talking specifically from the ground truth level. Yes, we have ambassadors on the show. Yes, we have PhD people, but you also know my passion for the ground truth and bringing you folks who can bring their direct experience from the ground, real things that really happen. We have Miles Vining, who's a sort of a student at IU, but that's secondary. He also is a foreign weapons expert, in particular from the Mideast, and you can and should absolutely check out the Silah Report, SILAH report. You can find them on Instagram primarily, but also you can go to their website, and you can also find them on Twitter, or just get me, Pete, at breakitdownshow.com or at Pete A. Turner, anywhere. And I will get you over there. If you're into foreign weapons and knowledge there, Miles is an out-and-out expert. We don't get a whole lot into that in this episode just because we talk about the Mideast and the current state of affairs, and it's always fascinating when we do that. We'll definitely have Miles back on for more talk. We recorded this episode, get this, in Raqqa, Syria. So I wasn't there, but Miles was there, and that's where he is. He does work with the Free Burma Rangers. Now I have to do a little bit of a caveat here. While Miles works with the Free Burma Rangers, he is not a spokesperson for them. He doesn't speak for them. His comments are going to be from his own experience, his own observations. So, and what do those guys do? Go to Free Burma Rangers, I think it's .com or .org, and you can learn all about their charitable work. They provide aid in conflict zones, like at the very tip of the spear. You know, people around them are in significant life crisis, whether it's combat or anything else. Actually, just today, Miles gave me an update about some Russian combat activity against Turks in the area that he was in. That is how close he is to the front lines, to the tip of the spear. He is there as a Free Burma Ranger providing aid to people. So we're going to break down Islam, the region, why we're involved, what happens, what doesn't happen. And I know you're going to love this. Again, not going to find this anywhere else. You're just not going to find it. And I barely got Miles to talk about it. So big thanks to Miles. And you guys definitely let him know what you think of the episode so we can get more from him. Super great guy. Also, hat tip over to Bill Mankins, who is a partner of mine and someone I absolutely love his work. He's the one that turned me on to Miles, and we got him on. And I can't thank Bill enough. I'm going to see him soon, and I just can't thank Miles enough. It's a great episode. I'm going to skip all of my self-promotional stuff, but I will say this. Support us at SaveTheBrave.org. All right, here comes... Get ready, you can have your mind blown. Here comes Miles Vining.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, I'm Miles Vining, and this is the Break It Down show. Yeah. So, just real quick.
Yeah.
I'd like to tone down, if not leave out altogether, my FBR involvement, particularly because I don't like it when Silah Report is conflated with the Free Burma Rangers, because they're not related whatsoever. I'm a Free Burma Rangers volunteer, and some of the stuff that I see while in Syria and Iraq ends up on Silah Report, but there's no Venn diagram between the two of them.
Miles Vining is calling in from Raqqa. There, I handled it for you. First off, holy shit, man! You're in Syria, and I'm pretty sure everybody's now just like, wait, what? What the hell's going on? So, I met Miles through Bill Mankins, who you all have heard from before, and we'll hear from again soon. Bill and I are combat buddies. We have done a lot of stuff outside of the wire, and that's sort of where Miles exists, is out in conflict zones doing things that are oftentimes lethal towards him and his group, but also extremely complex, and it involves dexterity that is just, first off, I admire what you're doing. The passion and the heart and the service that goes into what you work on is just remarkable. I guess let's just start with, what the heck are you doing in Raqqa right now?
So I'm with the Free Burma Rangers. We are a multi-ethnic international relief group. We are originally started based doing a lot of humanitarian relief work in Burma, what is currently Myanmar. And we've been in the Middle East for the past several years. And recently we're going through Syria right now. And we're returning after a trip in October after the Turkish invasion, in which we were providing relief supplies and casualty support to the Tel Tamer and Ainisa fronts where the Turks invaded, to the self-administration forces in those areas, and particularly a lot of the IDPs that ran from the Turkish invasion from that. So this trip, we're back here. We're seeing what we're really trying to do here is talk to the people in town, so to speak, try to help with more of the humanitarian gap and try to get more relief supplies in where it is needed. There's a huge IDP situation right now, both from the Turkish invasion and also from the ongoing situation in Idlib, where a lot of refugees are flowing out of there and are flowing into, some of them are flowing into northeastern Syria, and seeing what we can do for them there as well.
Okay, let's make sure you slow down and say IDP is internally displaced people. Give us an idea of what that
So a
means.
refugee is someone who crosses the international border and is fleeing a conflict or other situation, whereas an IDP, an internally displaced person, hasn't crossed an international border. It's a different kind of problem for the governments involved. It's a lot easier to be an IDP than it is a refugee. But for what we're working with right now is IDPs in Syria.
What does the IDP situation look like for, and I know, look, I get it. It's complicated and you don't not one answer, but just give us an idea of what, because most folks have never met anybody who's an IDP and they don't realize that sometimes they live in junkyards because that's literally the place with the most shelter and stuff. But what does an IDP look like in a place like Syria?
So right now, you've got the Syrian civil war that's been going on since 2012. Right now, due to the Turkish invasion, you have a lot of people and families, mostly families, women and children, who ran away from the areas in which the Turks invaded, and they've run to further population centers and villages where they're taking shelter. And right now, essentially, they don't have jobs, they don't have income, they need food, they need supplies, and especially with the winter, it's a lot colder. And the problem for the cities in the area are that they are taking up schools. So now you have the local education systems have an issue where the kids, what they were formerly going to school in, is now an IDP collection site for families that can't return to their towns in Ras Al Ain or in Tel Abyad.
What happens when a family's home is, it's rubble and they don't, it's not like there's a central banking system and ATMs and you can, you have pretty much what you can carry. Is that correct?
Yeah, whatever they could fit on their pickup trucks. In a lot of these cases, a lot of the IDPs here, they aren't coming from sort of destroyed conflict areas. A lot of them were running away from the Turkish invasion because they didn't want to stick around to see what the Turks or what the Turkish supported Free Syrian Army or Syrian National Army would end up doing to them in the case of an occupation. So a lot of them fled. So they're living in a lot of schools, a lot of community areas, and in terms of support, you have a lot of local organizations that are answering the call for bringing in medical supplies, bringing in doctors, bringing in relief supplies, bringing in food, bringing in essential humanitarian stuff. So
when you guys do this kind of work, obviously there's a zillion problems to solve. Are these families typically complete? Obviously anybody who's surviving from whatever kind of conflict they're in, but are we looking at like, a mom, a dad, a grandma, and a bunch of kids, or are these fractions of a family and they're scattered to the wind?
Yeah, more like fractions, more like immediate family members, because you got to remember the communities here, pretty diverse. Or you'll have maybe a family that's based in Sarakani might have more relatives in Tel Tamer or some of the other cities around it. So it's just that one small family in Sarakani, for instance, that would run away to either those other family spots or back to places like Hasaka or Kamishli, where there's these larger schools, and that's where the education system is kind of being interrupted. So what we've been seeing are, a lot of mother and children pairs. You see some husbands involved. You see some grandparents, but for the most part, it's a lot of sort of mothers and their children. Men sometimes as well. Other times the men aren't there; they've been killed.
So you guys are getting these folks immediate help. They're trying to get them from today until tomorrow, today until next month or whatever. But is there another organization that goes in and kind of nurtures them from okay, we're no longer going to live in whatever place it is they came from because it doesn't exist, or politically it doesn't exist. But does someone help them get lodging and find jobs and all those kind of things? Or when does that case management stop for you guys?
Well, so for us, we're an extremely small organization. I mean, our team is about 20 or less, and there's very little that we can actually do at sort of these behind the line sites at these IDP collection centers. Our role is mostly in the front line, in the conflict zones where other organizations can't go to or won't go to or aren't able to go to. So really what we're seeing back here in some of these larger areas is sort of checking in on them. We have Good Life programs where we run children's programs for some of these sites. And we're looking at what's happening and trying to send out reports about what's happening so those bigger NGOs can get to some of these sites in the rear, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do this extremely? Let's just talk about how dangerous this is. I mean, if people aren't understanding this, there's desperate people everywhere. There's often open conflict. How dangerous is it?
Extremely dangerous. The last time we were in Syria, one of our members was actually killed. Zhao Sang. He was a Kachin Ranger from northern Burma, from the Kachin region of northern Burma, and he was killed when a mortar landed next to one of our vehicles. So yeah, and it's extremely dangerous in that regard. A couple other guys were wounded in that attack. Before that, we've had a translator that was killed in Iraq, as well as multiple guys getting wounded there as well too. So yeah, it can be very dangerous and lethal. Day
to day, is it dangerous, or is it dangerous like? And I'm trying to contextualize danger here, Miles. So bear with me. At any given point in time, exploding things happen, and if you're next to it, then that's it. That's your day. But day to day, is it dangerous? Do you always feel the tension of danger? Is your head on a swivel? How would you rate the level of danger?
I'd say it's that typical combat ratio of 95% complete boredom and then 5% sheer terror, and you're not living in that 5% sheer terror all the time. It's only that 5%. So there, and again, like a lot of the stuff that we do is logistics. Moving supplies and getting stuff in and doing supply runs to get more relief supplies and working with bringing casualties back and forth. And I mean, so if you take the case of, bringing a casualty from the front line to a rear hospital, the period that's the most dangerous is when, you're picking up that casualty at that forward area. And the rest of the trip back at the hospital into the rear is, relatively calm. There's nothing to it. So.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And then I guess the big question is why? Why? I mean, obviously the service side of it, but this is extremely dangerous. It doesn't sound like it's well paid. It's got to wreck any kind of home life and rooting situation. Why are you doing this?
Yeah, it's actually not paid at all.
Perfect.
Most of us, the majority of us in the Free Burma Rangers are unpaid volunteers. And we do it because it's meaningful. A lot of us have religion that motivates them, whether they're Christian, Muslim, or Buddhist, or we have some agnostics as well, because it's important to them, because they feel a calling to do it. And for a lot of us, we feel a sense of need and meaning where no one else is providing it, where you feel there's a great injustice done. I mean, for example, after when the Turks invaded and the United States left the Kurds to die in northeastern Syria, I mean, that was, it was a horrible event, and for us to be able to go in there and help people at the front and help some of these IDPs there as well, that was a very important feeling. Outside of any sort of government mandated thing, we're all doing this because we really believe in the mission and we really believe in the people. And
so when you say volunteers, I mean, are you paying for your own food and everything too, or are they providing you? And I'm doing quotey fingers because I know these things are up in there. Food and housing. Like, are they providing life support, or is this all on you?
So while on mission, everything's provided as part of that mission. I mean, you're not going to go hungry on a mission because you don't have enough money to feed yourself. In terms of stuff like getting there and, bringing your own gear, stuff like bags and, cold weather gear and that kind of thing, that's definitely all on you.
Okay. So you're not going to starve. They're going to provide you lodging and housing and everything, but you're going to buy the plane ticket to whatever the location is. And from there, you guys take off as a team. Where else have you been in the world to do this kind of incredible work?
For me, most of my work with FBR has been in Syria. Mm-hmm. I've been to our training camp in Burma. And I've been on one of our missions there, and that was a low key conflict in Karen State, which right now there's a tentative ceasefire between the Burmese government and the Karen, and so that is nothing. That is very unlike the conflict in Syria right now.
Right, but yeah, I guess the human crisis is still just as important. I mean, there's people that don't have enough, and they're trying to live out of whatever kind of crap situation they're in.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, in northern Burma, it's the complete flip side. And you have a complete full-on civil war IDP situation going on in Kachin State and Shan State going on there. And not to mention the Rohingya as well in Arakan State, western Burma.
Why do people stay internally? What is it that keeps them, they just move 200 miles away, even though they have nothing? Why don't they just walk to the border and go across and get international help?
I mean, you've got your whole community, you've got your whole life, is in some of these places, and it's a balance, right? You could abandon that and run away to safety, or you could maintain that and live in some fear and live under threat. But it's a very hard thing, I think, for a lot of people to abandon or to run away from, everything in their lives that is working and is stable in that context. I mean, yeah, there's a war on and stuff, and there's also a chance of it not affecting you. In a lot of these conflict areas, unfortunately for a lot of civilians, they're getting killed and wounded all the time. But sometimes there's communities that are able to sort of live through the conflict if they stay low, and they have a chance of continuing.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's sort of like why would you shelter in place in Florida during a hurricane? Because we know how to survive a hurricane. We know that we're here, and a lot of these things. I mean, there's instability, so the instability may move away from your location, and you just go back to your regular life in some slightly degraded form. But if you leave forever, you're not coming back.
Exactly. And, in some cases of these communities, you do leave forever. One, you're probably not going to come back. Two, even if you do come back, you don't know what you're coming back to. There could be somebody else living in your house at that point. And that's certainly a problem right now with a lot of the people who fled the areas that the Turks invaded, because you have Turkey interested in pushing, almost 2 million Syrian refugees back into Syria, into this area, this buffer zone, this safe zone, as Turkey calls it, and occupying the areas where these previous IDPs have left.
Yeah, there is that, right? There's the international political side of it, where Turkey is trying to create a different reality in terms of what is Turkey and what isn't, and what's a contested zone. And when, I mean, there is that, like, if you live in that area, you are in no control over who is coming down the road on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Give us some insight in terms of the Burma Ranger mission, Free Burma Ranger mission. Is it primarily like food and shelter? Are there other aspects? Is it medicine? Give us an idea of what the palette of aid is.
Well, so we're extremely small, a very small organization. We do not see ourselves working in the sort of bigger IDP camps or the refugee camps, and we sort of follow, what Dave Eubank has created since the 1990s, and brings it up into what it is today. We're trying to fill the humanitarian gap, which is that little space at the front line, at the tip of the spear, so to speak, of these conflict zones in these areas where there are no big organizations there. There's the UN, the Red Cross, these other big organizations, or any organizations actually that are committed to civilians who are trapped in these conflict zones in terms of medical aid, in terms of basic food and supplies. They can't or they won't get there. And that's for a huge variety of reasons. And a lot of them, it's a good thing that they're not there. There's a lot of risk involved. There's people dying. There's all sorts of stuff that happens in war, which a lot of people would be very right to stay away from. And what FBR has done since its beginnings in Burma in the mid 1990s is try to fill this humanitarian gap where these other groups can't and won't get to.
Is this your primary job? Or, obviously it's not a job, but is this your primary effort, or do you do this in spurts? Talk about how you use your time.
I would say I do this in spurts. I go for a couple months at a time with FBR, and I focus on other stuff. I come back to the US or I travel elsewhere. And my primary gig outside of FBR is a group called Silah Report, which is a website / community research group that I founded a couple of years ago that focuses on small arms from the Middle East and Central Asian and North African regions of the world.
Okay, so this is a totally different thing then. And so these things don't overlap at all. The Free Burma Ranger work is completely separate. Maybe you have some access shared, but other than that, you're not, those things don't cross over.
Yeah, no, there's nothing in common between Silah Report and FBR. No.
Okay, so and do you monetize the Silah Report, or is this another project that's more passion based?
Yeah, so Silah Report, it is monetized. We pay authors to write articles for us. We sell patches. We sometimes bring in stuff from overseas and we sell it in the US. And then we try to get stuff out in magazines and other online editorials and that sort of deal. And we talk about it on other YouTube channels and that sort of thing. But yeah, no, we're primarily a research center looking at this stuff from angles that haven't been looked at before within small arms research.
Okay, what the heck is small arms research?
Yeah, so you've how I don't know, how do I even break this down? It isn't really historical small arms research really isn't an academically recognized field as it is, because it can be very technical in nature. You get there's some folks that dig in more into forensics and that deals more into criminal investigation stuff. There's historians out there who are delving into this, writing books about small arms, about historical small arms, about different, technical variations of things. There's collectors who write about this stuff. But when I say historian, there really isn't a sort of PhD or master's track you can go on to become a small arms historian. Most of the folks out there are sort of self-made or sort of fly between, government agencies and stuff like that. And they do the public side of that, which comes out in books and articles and other things.
So, yeah, Bill tells me that you're a master of small arms, especially foreign small arms. How did you end up on this path? And then when did you realize that you were going to be able to fill this hole? Like, obviously with your passion, you must have said, holy cow, this is great. I would love to fill this historical, research hole here.
Yeah. So it was really a convergence of the stuff I was interested in, which coming back from Afghanistan, I was interested in furthering my language study at Pashto at Indiana University. And I was also interested in going back to Afghanistan in various capacities as a contractor. Later on, I did go back as a contractor and then as a YouTube director. But at the same time, I had this interest in small arms, which I've had for.
Did you say YouTube director?
Yeah, I ran a YouTube channel called TFB TV is the other YouTube channel I work with. It's called Tech TV Afghanistan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dude, you are an interesting cat. You do a lot of interesting things. Does that kind of work pay the bills then? Is YouTube paying you or is the organization paying you? Who's funding that kind of effort?
For TFB TV, it's a paid basis. We make videos and we have monetary income from YouTube, and we have Patreon that helps supports us on getting gear and stuff like that. For the Tech TV Afghanistan, I'm no longer a part of it. When I left, I had to hand it over. That was a paid venture as well. I was working for another company, a tech company in Kabul, that paid me to set up a YouTube channel for them. For the Firearm blog, I also write for there and for other magazines and stuff like that, where those are all paid articles as well. So essentially, I'm making a living as a freelance writer.
Okay. Wow, well, that's good work if you can get it. Are you a veteran?
I am.
Okay. So there's some sanity in this plan. Like you found yourself comfortable outside the wire. What was your job code or job specification?
I was an 0311 rifleman.
That makes no sense.
Okay. I was in the Marine Corps infantry for 4 years, enlistment contract. I deployed to Afghanistan 2 times in 2011 and then 13 to 14. The first deployment was mostly a lot of walking, a lot of patrolling. The second deployment was mostly mounted patrols and helo-borne operations out of Camp Leatherneck in Helmand Province. So.
Yeah, I mean, the weapons part makes sense with you being an 0311 for everybody's infantryman. So basically, he is a grunt, and that's not derogatory. It's just those guys do one thing. So obviously weapons, but you have a passion for the actual people, the culture, the language. When did you discover that?
Growing up it became a part of me in that, I grew up in Thailand, I grew up in Burma, I grew up in Malaysia, and things like languages and foreign cultures and odd food and, diarrhea on school trips, all became very, very normal to me. It was, I didn't think there was anything other than that. So when it came time to, when I would deploy to Afghanistan, became fascinated and interested by the Afghan people and the language and the culture and the Pashtuns in the South. I wanted to further that, and I did that at Indiana University. And so sort of the extension of my childhood was, continuing where I left off and furthering this stuff. So.
Do you like being in the U.S., or is that not your comfortable, safe place?
Not really. I like being from the U.S. It's great having a U.S. passport. I don't find myself challenged or fascinated by living in the United States. I am happy for the United States. I love America. I put my life on the line for this country.
Right.
But I would rather not spend my time in the U.S. I find that I would rather be close to my primary sources overseas.
One of the things that I always say is when we talk about our desire to intervene in conflict, what good or bad, like our intention is always to try to help. I mean, obviously there's other intentions, but we're trying to help. And, the long war is like, do we pull out of Kurdistan? Do we pull back in Kurdistan? All of these things come at the cost. Like if you stay, you're there, you're in the fight, you're forward projecting people, spending a ton of money. And if you pull back, you have to stomach the fact that there's going to be human crisis and atrocity there. Do you have a sense, like, do we intervene too much? Do we, is our desire to try to solve every problem too great? Or I don't know. What are your thoughts?
This is an extremely complicated question in terms of Iraq and Afghanistan, which in Afghanistan, I was personally a part of that endeavor, good or bad, as you call it that, and then
Right.
you were as well. I don't know how to answer that question for those two countries and for the peoples of those two countries, more importantly. But I do know how to answer for the involvement in Syria, in that our decision to leave the Kurds high and dry on October 12th of last year was probably the worst foreign policy decision the United States has ever made in the last decade.
Why?
Because for a multitude of reasons. Most importantly, it was because we left these people that gave everything to defeat an enemy that we all agreed was possibly one of the worst enemies we could face. I mean, outside of some of the really horrible regimes that are out there in the world today, this was something that we all agreed needed to be put in the dirt. And these were our allies that did it for us. I mean, the Syrian Kurds that started the Yapaga and Yapaja and formed
Are you
the
saying
SDF and later
Syrian
were
or
joined
a
by
Syrian? Which? Say it again.
Syrian.
Syrian Kurds. Okay.
Yeah. No, the Syrian Kurds that formed the Yapaga and Yapaja that later turned into Arab forces and Christian forces that joined the SDF. This was a force that lost over 10,000 killed in action to do this for us on the count of the United States and European allies, which essentially really only paid a price in ordnance and defense expenditures, right? And this is just what is so morally wrong about this whole thing is this is, a force that, stands for democracy and stands for freedom and stands for freedom of religion, stands for freedom of expression in northeastern Syria. And we threw that all away when we allowed Erdogan to.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
We threw that all away when we allowed Erdogan to invade. And that's the morally wrong. That's the just morally repulsiveness of it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's one thing to say that if you can't even point to where Raqqa is on the map or Erbil, but it's another thing if you've been to those places and talked to those people and understand it. How do the Kurds, if you were to guess, how do the Kurds view because look, all of this stuff is undergirded by betrayal. I mean, there's no president, there's no candidate for president who's going to circle Kurdistan on the map and say, I dare a motherfucker to say it's not Kurdistan. That's not happening, right? So betrayal is always at the root of this. I mean, the Kurds deserved a state a long time ago, and it just hasn't come to pass. How do they see us as a partner? I mean, obviously we have no problem stepping away from them or Iraq as a whole and going, hey, you're on your own now, see you later, But what do you think? What's your sense?
I think, well, we're obviously still involved to protect the oil fields at this point. And the thing is, I think the sense that we got from a lot of that I got from Kurds in northeastern Syria, they'd rather be betrayed by the United States than be betrayed by the Russians. And that would probably be a far worse betrayal because at least the United States, there's some sort of rapprochement, right? But with the Russians and Putin, it's like there's no, you're playing hard and fast with everything you have there.
Yeah.
That's an important sense for Syrian Kurdish feeling against the United States right now. And, well, I mean, in some places, the United States has returned. In places that the U.S. withdrew from, the U.S. has pushed forward, but not for the right reasons. The reasons why the U.S. has pushed forward is to confront Russian interference in the region. It's not for the reasons of protecting the people and trying to stabilize what is morphing to this conflict now.
Is that Syrian conflict in any way peaked? Is it improving? Has it reached its bottom? Like, where do you think it's at?
I think it's not over.
Okay.
I think we're still going to see several more years of the Syrian civil war. Unfortunately, for the people of Syria, there's still a lot of there's still a lot of unfinished business in terms of how people want to be governed and how they want this war to be conducted and how who's going to be in charge of what. That conclusion is still several years away from now.
Like any, heck, like their neighbors, and some of them are them, the Kurds. You can't get them to agree on what they want. You can't get Puerto Ricans to agree on status quo statehood or their own country. How are the Syrians aligned? I mean, obviously there's a civil war, so there's definitely at least two sides, but is it more complex than that?
Oh yeah, it's more complex than, I don't know, tangled spiderweb.
Right.
You've got different factions that are flipping sides with one another. The Turkish incursion was just the latest front in this war of many fronts. The area in Idlib is the biggest deal going on right now. We're between the Russians and Syrian forces pushing up against that little pocket that's up there. Mm-hmm. And then you have the sort of SDF, or the self-administered areas, which is holding on but only tacitly, working with the Russians and with Assad, only because they've got no other choice because the United States withdrew.
Why do we need to care about Syria? Especially some self-administrated strip of land. Like why? So let me give you some context. There's a naval EOD tech that walked into a building in Raqqa and he didn't die, but he's quadriplegic, lost his voice box, lost an eye, and now has to live his life as a quadriplegic with a bunch of kids. By the way, one of his kids needs as much care as he does on a day-to-day basis because he's also special needs. Why are we sending people to Syria to go deal with that at the cost of Kent and Stacy's, well-being?
Why? The first one, most important reason is that you had the birth of ISIS here. This is where ISIS gained hold. This is a movement that began here and ignited and allied with movements across the world. And this was where they got stomped out. And if we aren't here, and if we aren't fighting them, and if we aren't working to try to bring a peaceful Syria and try to bring a peaceful resolution, you'll get another ISIS. You'll get an ISIS 2.0. And we're already seeing, cells pop up and sleeper cells, and there's still a lot of issues in Deir Zor with ISIS support and stuff like that. I mean, the movement hasn't gone away at all. I mean, the idea that we vanquished ISIS in March of 2019 in the small hamlet of Baghouz is absolutely absurd. ISIS isn't vanquished. There's still a plethora of an ISIS population out there that wants to see the return of the caliphate. This is what ISIS widows were telling us outside of Baghouz when we were handing them food and water and giving them medical aid. They were saying that, God's testing us, that we didn't just come to Syria to join ISIS for the kicks of it. No, God is putting us through a great test right now. We're gonna come back. We're gonna rise even greater than before. And that is why we need to be involved in this stuff. And you can talk about involvement in Iraq or talk about involvement in Afghanistan, but Syria is especially the self-administered portion of Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces. That is a completely different ballgame than the ANA, than the AUP, than the Iraqi army as well.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm asking Miles some extremely complicated, powerful questions, and I appreciate you hanging with me on those because those are not easy questions, and but they're ones that people look. You can't get that straight answer here in the States, as you might imagine, and whatever answer you do get, you don't get it from someone who's ground truth centered. So I appreciate you doing that. Are we partnered in this at all? I mean, obviously we're partnered a little bit with the Syrian rebels and, the Kurds and maybe the Iraqis and stuff. But in this area, are there European countries? Is Turkey obviously a European country and Asian country, but are they cooperating in some kind of way that makes sense? I mean, they're actually an ally. The Kurds are friends. We actually have to deal with the fact that Turkey lets us use their airspace. We have bases there. Talk a little bit about that collaboration.
I mean, the Turkish collaboration is a strategic one that the United States wants to keep with, as you mentioned, the bases, the sort of NATO's southern flank, so to speak. That's on the strategic level. On the European level, a lot of European forces were joined in this fight as well. In Baghouz, you had French 155s that were supporting American SF teams that were, hammering the city of Baghouz every day. So you had a coalition that did come in and join in the fight against ISIS. Turkey is a much more complicated situation, though.
What is a 155?
It's an artillery shell. I think the max effective of, 15 kilometers or 15 or 20 kilometers, just a big artillery piece that lands with destruction.
It's just for the audience, so like if you think about roughly a coffee can made out of metal that shreds and tears and flies on 3 axes with shards of metal, it's a terrifying thing to have thrown at you, and it's no fun at all. Okay, so French forces and lots of other support in the area as everybody tries to stamp out the ISIS thing. I have to ask you, in general, what are your thoughts on Islam? Because obviously Islam is not okay, let me see if I can. The question's even hard to ask, Miles. So there are millions of, maybe even a billion peaceful Islamic folk who want no part of any kind of conflict like that. But there are also over a billion people that would like to have a caliphate. So how do you sort out Islam? Because it is a challenging thing. I mean, Arabs and Islam, they struggle with each other. This is the thing I found out the other day from Timothy McIntosh Smith, who wrote a fantastic book. It's called Arabs, the 3,000-year history of people, tribes, and culture, or something like that. And he said that Islam doesn't require faith. It requires submission. Whoa. Totally different way to approach the thing. So I'm not asking you to disparage their religion at all, but how do you sort through the complexities of the Arab people, of Islam, of a caliphate, all of these things that sort of drive the area that you're in towards, at least right now, towards instability?
Well, in terms of my views on Islam, I am Muslim for myself. So it becomes much more personal at that level. And looking at this area from that perspective is interesting as well. But in terms of your questions of, the factions and the sort of the Islam question, right? Of, okay, what's the violence come from? I think you've got so many different layers of what's happening, and you cannot. I don't think you can look at it at all in a singular religious flavor or religious phrase. You have politics that's happening. You have economics that's happening. You have harassment on different levels. You just have so many different factors that come into play. It's never one thing driven solely by religion. It may be a motivating thing in terms of, maybe a group's messaging or propaganda, but on an individual level and on smaller stuff than that, there's so much more that's happening that has to be taken into account. I mean, we can look at, in Afghanistan, what motivates Pashtuns to join the Taliban, and what you'll come up with isn't an Islamic messaging tool. What you'll come up with is a Pashtun nationalist movement that wants to be in charge of the country. And this is a rallying cry for Pashtuns to join that. You'll look at issues in, rural villages with men who want to, even at the smaller complex level, men who want to, they want another woman's hand in marriage, but that father won't let them. So they join the Taliban, this big bad force, and they're able to sort of coerce the father into allowing that kind of thing to happen. And that's the kind of thing that you're seeing in terms of ISIS in particular. ISIS, the monster that became ISIS. Well, first of all, I've never met another Muslim that would ever agree with anything that ISIS has or anything in their rhetoric. And there's also a lot of different perspectives that you can look at with ISIS, and a lot of different blends of what has become ISIS and what separates ISIS from Al Qaeda and everything. Examples of that. Some of it actually lie in. You have a lot of these immigrant populations living in Europe, living in North America as well, and part of ISIS is actually a reaction to Europe and the United States in these areas. Whereas if you look at sort of Al Qaeda and how Al Qaeda's messaging sort of went along the lines of, going after Israel, being the root cause of all evil, and then the United States supporting Israel, then that's why Al Qaeda is looking at the United States in that perspective. Or in, Osama bin Laden's initial gripe with the United States was stationing troops in the Arabian Peninsula, and the Saudi king not going against it, and Osama wanted to lead an army into Iraq to take over Kuwait, an Islamic army of Mujahideen veterans, etc. And whereas with ISIS, you don't see this concentration on Israel, and if anything, Israel and ISIS actually have very little beef with each other insofar as where ISIS has directed its messaging and directed its attacks to. And especially, you look at the beginnings of ISIS coming from the Islamic State in Iraq under Baghdadi, where he sort of injected ISIS into Syria. And you see ISIS as a return to Iraq. The hardest battles that were fought over with ISIS, we're in Mosul, we're fighting over Fallujah and Ramadi and all these other cities. These are Iraqi cities. These aren't Syrian cities. And so you see ISIS as a return to Iraq instead of a manifestation in Syria, which it was a manifestation in Syria. It definitely became that. But so that's another part of looking at it. You see this on the individual level too. You see a lot of ISIS widows that we met. It was almost an honor. It was almost an honorary thing to have a husband from Fallujah or from Iraq. The Iraqi dialect is a lot deeper, is a lot nicer to listen to. Men from Fallujah are like they fight like lions, or whatever reason they'd come up with. But you see this at that level too. So there's no singular sort of religious thing on this. You have to look far more than religion. This plays into economics and job security and conflict and stability and instability, and who's gonna provide money to whom and stuff like that. You look at local actors on the ground, and why do they do business with ISIS or with this or that? Some of them it's just because they need to make a buck, and they need to continue their business. And this isn't like an ideological thing at that point. This is an economic thing. That's some of my questioning for that.
What if we just said, hey, we support an Islamic sea, just like the Vatican, and we're going to say, that you guys, is it Najaf? Okay, great. We're going to draw a circle around Najaf, make it its own microstate, and that, or maybe it's Medina and Mecca, and you just draw a circle around the two of those, and you tell the Saudis, you get a lot of help from us. This is going to happen, and we give some kind of a caliphate, and let that happen. I know that's crazy, but I want to just ask that question because it's a valid point for a lot of people to understand. Like the Catholics have it, they're not causing a problem. Do these things go together at all?
Well, the idea. Well, first of all, the idea of a caliphate, the Ottomans sort of took it and made it their own little thing. But the idea of a caliphate goes back to after the Prophet Muhammad died, and you have the first four al-Khalifa Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs, and the whole idea of that was that, and I think it was Omar who was the first caliph, and he has this famous speech where he actually says, I rule with your consent. I rule because I owe the masses something, because I owe the masses, I owe the masses my allegiance. And so the idea of that is sort of a democratically not democratically elected body, but a majority consented governance for people to be ruled under. And the problem with ISIS is that nobody in the Muslim world agreed with anybody being under ISIS. The people who did moved to Syria, and that was the point of that. And then the more important aspect of that is that the sects in Islam between Sunni and Shia and the different schools within Sunni, and then you also have Sufi as well. And you have it to the point where a lot of these different divisions are actually looking at each other and calling each other unbelievers just as much as they would be calling, a Western, Christian background or a Western whatever background. It doesn't matter. Take your pick. And I mean, to that point, you have, you look at the Taliban in the 1990s, and you see accounts of Taliban, scholars or imams going into Shia areas and them being told that these are heretics, these are unbelievers and everything. And, that is a completely true thing. You can't look at this as Islam against the West. This is Al Qaeda's messed up view and messed up extremism of Islam going against everybody who isn't them and the West. Or this is maybe the Ayatollah's view of this, or maybe this is an ISIS view, or maybe this is a Boko Haram thing. It's not Islam versus the West. It's these segments within these areas that go against everybody else and the West.
So it's simple to solve. I love it. I mean, as soon as you think you have your hands wrapped around these problems, you can't encompass them. That's the whole thing. And what I love about the points that you're making is when you take this with the other experts that we've had on the show and we talk about these problems, there are not simple solutions. The only way to deal with these things, if we choose to deal with them, is to have 1,000 of you to go out there who's language qualified, the religion thing. Obviously, you have to have a capacity for Islam if you're going to go work in this. It doesn't have to mean you have to be Islamic, but that's where these things get guided through. You can't just say, hey, we're going to send 400 Marines and it's going to be problem solved. None of them are that simple. These are big, hairy, scary, complex problems that require not just an international force, but an NGO force and all these other things combined together. It's extraordinarily complex to stabilize these regions. Let me just ask you one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to be able to stabilize I hate to say the whole Orient, but let's just say the Syria, like Jordan is a stable country. It has its problems, but it's okay. Even Lebanon, it kind of spikes up and it gets a little crazy every now and then, but it's for the most part a fairly stable place. Will we see that for Iraq and Syria in your lifetime?
Well, I mean, there are some parts of Iraq that are a lot safer than anywhere in the United States. You take what the Kurds have in Kurdistan in the north, in the KRG region. That's one of the safest parts in Iraq right now. And the Iraqi Kurds have a little slice of heaven up there, and they like what they got. So in terms of Kurdistan is relatively stabilized, to answer that question. Jordan, interestingly enough, I was in Jordan recently, and some Jordanians have a view that, as you said, they've got these issues with, whether their system of governance or the king is really in charge and stuff like that. But they don't really want to rock the boat because they see how rocking the boat works all around them. And they're like, we'll keep what we have here. It's really not that bad in terms of ending up like Syria when a decade-long civil war. I think all these places happen with all these locations that you mentioned are very unique in their composition and mixture and how they and the demographics of the people involved. And another thing that you have to look at as well is things like natural resources. And you look at things like water, and you look at food supply and governance and stuff like that. And you can see that, somewhere in Iraq, it's hard, this is a very arid desert country. There's things at the micro level that work their way up for why these conflicts sort of ignite, and then why local economy will spur a lack of jobs or a lack of ingenuity to go into that. But yeah.
So you're saying, who knows, is what your answer to that question. It's a lot of factors to go in there. I mean, it's not just about having access to oil and other resources. I mean, Iraq can feed the entire the entire region. They're so rich agriculturally, but they got to be calmed down first and get some electricity and some stability to really move forward. It would be really something to see Iraq emerge like South Korea did over the past 60 years, where it really becomes, this place where even if they're surrounded by crazy neighbors, they really can be the place that they've always been throughout human civilization, a place of intellect and farming and all these things. They really have all the tools if they can just kind of get a couple of wins stacked together.
Yeah, and I mean, these things come in waves throughout history. I mean, The United States isn't always going to be on top of this wave.
What?
There was a time when, yeah, but like as you said, look at Baghdad and some of the earlier parts, especially in the golden age of Islam, as an example of history. I mean, this was center of the arts and literature and technology and advancement and all that and everything. And, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. So you don't know how that's going to return or in what form.
No, fair enough. Okay, so let me just wrap it up then. Hey, I appreciate you answering those questions. There's a whole lot of hard questions to answer, and it'll probably turn out that you're wrong on all of them, because that's what happens to me all the time when I talk about that region of the world. It's like, I know what's going on. You're like, actually, it was different than I thought. But the point is that you're there, you have experience, and you're talking in the moment about things that are very, very, very hard. But I know there are questions that people will be able to get. They'll have these questions and they've got at least a decent answer. And you're not screaming about the president. You're not screaming about Nancy Pelosi and all this other nonsense. You're just talking about a complex place with real people that have real issues. And a lot of times those issues and goals are cross-purpose to the person across the street from them. So I appreciate what you do, the time that you spend to go overseas to try to make the world at least a little better place from the ground level, because we need more folks like you. And I really appreciate you doing what you do.
No, well, thank you. I enjoy doing it, and it's an honor to be here.